Okay, so this is the second idea project done in Pro Tools. Going to assume that we've got everything saved correctly, going to assume we've done all the things with audio playback engines and excuse me, setting up all of those devices correctly. If you're having issues with that, like all the other lessons, see me in class. If you have questions, certainly consult earlier projects where there's information about that as well. But we do want to make sure before we get going any further that we have taken care of all of those things. But I'm going to, for the sake of this video, I'm going to assume that we have all of that taken care of. Other things you're going to want to make sure of is over in this area here, you're going to want to make sure that you can see the tempo. You're going to want to be sure that you can see bars and beats. If any of these things are not up, click on the little black drop-down menu here and make sure there's a check mark next to it. And you'll notice for tempo here, if it's not checked, the tempo bar goes away. I need that tempo ruler, it's called. So I'm going to make sure it's got a check next to it, and there it is again. From there, obviously, I can go in and I can double-click on the little red triangle, and I can either type in a numerical value. So, for example, go back to the default 120, or I can make it, 84 or whatever I want. Or the other thing I can do is I can use the T key on my keyboard, and you can actually tap the tempo you want. So it just kind of depends on what you want to do. For now, I'm going to leave it there at 107. So hit OK, and you'll notice that my tempo here is the same across the entire ruler. If I want to change it later on down the line, I can, but for now we're going to keep it simple. So the next thing I want to do is I want to get our basic drum beat in place, because remember, the goal of this project is to get a drum beat in that's fairly simple and straightforward. And then I want to be able to play on top of that. So here's how we're going to do that. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to go up to Track, and we're going to go to New, and we're going to do a stereo instrument track. Now remember, audio tracks are for anything that's coming from outside the computer. Your guitars, your voice, your bass, your kazoos, your acoustic pianos, whatever it is, audio track. Instrument tracks really are for what they call virtual instrument tracks. So yes, I know a guitar, for example, is an instrument. A piano is an instrument, and on, and that is very true. But in terms of terminology within Pro Tools, instrument track refers to a virtual instrument where the sound is being generated inside the software, not from outside. So in any case, instrument track, I'm going to hit create. Don't worry about ticks versus samples right now. We'll just leave it at ticks. So one, stereo, instrument track, create. And here I have a track. Now I'm going to go over here to my track name, and I am going to call this track Drum Beat. You can call it Drum Kit, you can just call it Drum, you can call it whatever you want, but you don't want to call it Inst1, because Inst1 is going to become confusing later when you have lots of tracks. So we're going to create a drum beat, we're going to call it Drum Beat. I'm going to hit OK. And then what I'm going to do next is I am going to go in and I am going to insert on to my channel strip here a virtual instrument. Now, to do that, I have to go to the Insert column. If for any reason this Insert column is not there, go over to the white drop-down menu and make sure that Inserts A through E is present. Again, if it's not, you'd see something like this. Instruments and who knows, whatever those columns are. But if I don't have Insert in there, this isn't going to work. So I go to Insert A through E. I'm going to pick the very first one here. I'm going to click on this little dot, multi-channel plugin. And for this one, I'm going to use an instrument. I have a bunch of extras here, but the one that you're going to have that we want to use is at the bottom. It's called Expand 2. And it looks a little bit different than Boom did in our first idea project in our beat making. And it defaults to a synth voice that I'll play for you in a second. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to stretch the track out. So I'm going to go up here, and you'll see that as I get a little closer, my mouse goes from the pointer to this weird looking plus sign looking kind of thing. Click on the bottom of the track and just pull down, and you'll see that it's widening it, right? So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up here where it says clips, and I'm going to change this to notes. And I now get a keyboard, and now I have a piano roll basically. So what I'm going to do is I am looking to, well here actually I'll play the sound for you so you can hear it. It's kind of an interesting little synth pad, but it's not going to work very well for a drum beat. So the next thing I'm going to do, and by the way, if I want, I can click on the little red dot for expand. It takes away being able to see the interface, but it leaves the plugin active. So something to keep in mind. It's just a visual change. In any case, I look up here. I've got all my measures going across. 1, 5, 9, 13. And that's going to make it really difficult to do my next step. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to magnify and zoom in. So the way I do that is I'm going to use over here the zoom in tools, okay, the zoom tools. And you'll notice when you put your mouse over anything in Pro Tools, it actually tells you what it is. So I'm going to use this horizontal zoom in. Now if you don't have your zoom tools, all the way over on the right, there's this little arrow here. It's pointing down. Click on that little circle, and you have all of these things you can pull in, and all different kinds of combinations. So for example, if I do all, everything's already there. But if I do minimal, see how some stuff disappeared, including my zoom tools. I want to bring them back. Go to all. Okay? Now, next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to widen this. And as I do this, I'm going to press here. You'll see, now it's 1, 3, 5, and so on. Now it's 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm getting closer. 1, 2. I want to get down to where I can see the measures and the individual beats. Getting closer, spreading out. And here we go. So 1, beat 1, 1, beat 2, measure 1, beat 3, measure 1, beat 4, then measure 2, beat 1, and so on. You'll also notice that I have some grid lines here in my piano roll. If I go up here next to my counter and turn that off, you'll see that the grid, turning the grid off, turns the grid off. And now I can't see anything. And my grid back on at quarter notes. The other thing you're going to make sure is your main counter, you want it to be bars and beats. If it's minutes and seconds, you'll still have a grid and you'll still be able to see some things, but it changes the priority, and now the priority is minutes and seconds, which isn't going to work for us. We want bars and beats for this project. So I've got my counter at bars and beats. I've got my grid here. The next thing I'm going to do is actually change my grid to eighth notes. So now you can see there's little eighth notes in here. And I am going to go into my pencil tool so that I can drop in some notes. And the cool thing here is that the notes are the same as they were in GarageBand. So I'm looking for octave 1 right here, and if I press on it, I'll get the sound. Oh, except I still have the synth sound. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go to expand, open this up. I'm going to go up to the top here to presets, factory default. And I'm going to select drums, which is submenu 26. Then I have all these choices. Pick whichever one you want. Doesn't really make a difference other than it should be something you like. I'm going to go with just a fairly standard session drum kit right there. You can see it populates my instrument voices a little bit differently, makes some other changes in here. We'll get into this interface another time. For now, I've got a drum kit on expand. I'm going to click off on this. And now I can go here and I can actually play, for example, if I find the 1, the C of the octave 1, there's my kick drum. And above that, the D is again the snare. And above that, all the way to F sharp here, that's my hi-hat. And you can see that I'm getting signal here. So I can check to make sure I've got everything the way I want it to be. So now what I've got to do is I've got to place some notes. So again, with my pencil tool, I'm going to go in and I'm going to start dropping notes in. So all I have to do is click here and I get a kick drum. But notice it's not on the line. So what am I going to do? Well, I got a couple of options. One is I can move it around, and remember you can move notes around, you can move them up, you move them wherever you want. Cat walking across drum kit. Anyway. Point is, I can put it wherever I want to place it. The problem with this is I can run this all the way to the front edge of the session and to my kick drum. But when I want to put a kick drum now on beat 3, lining that up, I can do it, but boy, it's going to be tricky. There's an easier way. And it's up here in our edit mode selector. So I'm going to go to grid. And now everything lines up to my grid. You'll notice things just jump to the grid. I can't move them off if I wanted to. So beat 1 and beat 3. I'm going to go up to my transport here. I'm going to go all the way back to my beginning of my session. I can also use the return key to do that. And I'm going to hit play. 2 kick drums. Now, how do I know it's on the grid and perfect? Well, one of the things I can do is I can insert a click track. And I want the click track, personally, I like it to be up at the top, so I'm going to click on the name. I'm just going to drag it up and drop it right there, and now it's at the top. Now if I press play, I hear a click, and I get my two kick drums. So I know we're in line here. Next thing I got to do is over here on my snare drum. So beat 2, beat 4, and play again. And at this point, I can keep the click on, but it's kind of redundant because it's going on quarter notes, and I've got something on quarter notes. So I'm going to turn it off. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to lay down some hi-hat stuff. Now, when I do this, I am just going in and I'm just dropping in eighth notes, and we'll play it just for a second. Okay, not terribly exciting, but it's steady, it's consistent, and I can play over top of it. Problem is I only have one measure, so what am I going to do? Well, what I'm going to do is the following. There's a couple different ways you can loop things in Pro Tools. One of the easiest ways, though, is to take the selector tool, staying in grid mode, and you're going to just select the whole measure, beat 1 through to beat 1 of measure 2. Then go over to Edit and Repeat. How many repeats do I want? I don't know. Let's do 8. And now you can see I've got all of these repetitions all the way through up until the start of beat 1 of measure 10. When I play this, there we go. So I've now got my beat in place. I'm going to now close up this track a little bit so I've got a little more room to work with on the desktop. Now the other thing I can, oh wait, where did it go? Is it still there? I can't see it any longer. Hold on. I can hear it. Why can't I see it? I can't see it because I'm in the wrong octave here. Using these arrows, I can actually scroll down or up and find it again. So there it is. There's my drum beat. Now I can see the whole thing. It's a visual thing. Is it absolutely essential? Depends on how you feel about it, but I think it's good to be able to see these things. Okay, so the other thing you should be aware of is that there's another place where you can edit this MIDI data from your drum kit or really any MIDI data, and it's down here, this lower left corner with the arrow pointing up. Click on that, and you get this MIDI editor, and you can actually resize it if you want. You'll notice there's a lot of very similar tools. You do a lot of interesting things with this. You can, again, piano roll. You can hear kick drum, snare, hi-hat, and so on. Other thing that's kind of fun is if you press this little button here, notation, it will actually give you, there it is, the drum beat in the form of actual notation, which is kind of cool. Different things you can play with if you like working in MIDI data that way too. So there's lots of options. In any case, keep in mind that if you don't like a note, just like in any other circumstance, if you don't like a note, for example this one, you can delete it, or you can move it. You could do whatever you want. So you can change the pattern around. There's all kinds of interesting variations on this. Lots of controls in Pro Tools. Obviously, you can also, if you wanted to, for example, you could add in some additional notes. If you wanted to change up your beat, you can do all kinds of interesting things. But keep in mind that whatever you do here, it doesn't change it down the line necessarily the way we have this defaulted. So you're going to want to then possibly recopy things and change them. So for example, I just changed this first measure a little bit. My beat's a little more complicated now. If you like that, you can keep it again. I would recommend, I'll just duplicate this down for you a few times so you can see that, and here we hear it playing. This beat's a little more complicated than the basic one that the assignment requires. As long as it's steady and consistent, something you can play on top of. Don't get too overburdened by this. Just make sure that you can play along to it. Again, you can adjust the tempo if you want, things of that nature, and use the grid mode as you're penciling this in so that you can make sure that everything is played correctly. Yes, you can use a MIDI controller and you can play it in and quantize if you want, but the important thing is that the beat is consistent and very, very steady so that you can play over top of it. I'm going to get rid of this MIDI editor real quick. Last thing I just want to mention to you is to remember that as you're adding tracks, you go up to Track, New, and then it's a matter of what tracks do you need. Remember, audio tracks are for anything coming from outside the computer. Instrument tracks are virtual instruments, MIDI controllers, and things of that nature. And you can add multiple. So you could add 2 mono audio tracks, and you could add 3 stereo instrument tracks if you wanted, for example, all at one time. And there they are. Now keep in mind that you're going to want to rename all of these. Don't just record on Audio 1. If this is going to be, say, my voice, I might call this Richard Vox, and then everything will be lined up that way. Also remember, you can change the order around. So if I click on drum beat and want to move it back up to the top, or I want to put Audio 2 at the bottom, I can put these anywhere I want. But try to keep things organized, and everybody needs to be contributing an additional track, and they should all work together. All right, so that basically gets you started on the second idea. Again, I'm excited to hear what you guys come up with, and good luck. Have fun.